Admittedly, my most vivid memory of my friendship with Richard Tchaikovsky had little to do with him. That was Edith's younger brother. It was the day he introduced me to his 19-year-old sister, Edith. She was seated on the couch in the living room of their apartment with one or two other girls. Edith was wearing a blue uniform with matching blouse and an impressive hat. I thought she was a nurse. When introduced, she turned and smiled at me and said hello before returning to converse with her friends. I was smitten. I was 11 years old, pushing 12, and funny feelings in my physiology had begun to stir. Watching Edith from my bedroom window across the street, I would often see her standing at the bus stop. She possessed all the attributes, quickly becoming a main focus of my developing interest in girls. My one intimate moment with Edith Tchaikovsky was sometime in the summer of 1965. Edith was walking up the alley toward the corner bus stop. Presumably, she was on her way to work at that nursing home wearing that eye-catching blue uniform. I was riding my new Mustang bicycle with the revolutionary leopard skin banana seat with a Davy Crockett's coonskin tail dangling from the rear passenger handbar, which swung back and forth from air gusts generated when pedaling the bike at top speed. I always wore a plastic rat-pink ring on the middle finger of my left hand, prominently displayed and menacing when wrapped around the bicycle handgrip. I raced down the alley at full speed to catch up to Edith with my $6 transistor radio taped to the handlebars, cranked at full volume to CKLW AM, blasting "The Morning Sun is Shining Like a Red Rubber Ball" by The Circle. This was my chance. I was at the top of my game and loaded for bear. I raced up alongside Edith and hit my brakes, kicking up a cloud of dust, startling her. Confident I had impressed her with my devil-may-care attitude, I offered her a ride on my bike for the final 4 meters to the bus stop. She let me down gently, politely explaining she couldn't chance wrinkling or getting bicycle grease on her uniform. A convincing rationale. The Tchaikovskys moved away shortly thereafter, and that was the last time I saw Edith Tchaikovsky alive.
"The fun is about to begin," yelled Dave Shepley from the upper tier of the rotunda. They needed to find the guard hostages and bring them to the dome. He wanted to put them on display, and if the army invaded, they would be the first ones killed. Shepley and his accomplices ran towards 4B range, where they knew the guards were being held. Wayne Ford, inmate number 2778, was 285 pounds with a 19-inch neck and a 57-inch chest. He had been put in charge of guarding the hostages, and he had no intention of letting anyone near the guards. He knew they were the inmates' only potential insurance against a full-out military invasion. Wielding a sledgehammer, he and a dozen other armed inmates were prepared for battle. "Give us the pigs," demanded Shepley. "No way, pal," said a determined Ford, gripping his weapon tightly. The 5 kidnapped guards, locked in a cell further down the corridor, could hear the commotion. What was happening? They looked at each other, terrified, but no one dared to speak. Their jailers had treated them well so far, giving them sandwiches, coffee, and cigarettes. But the hostages knew their safety was hanging in the balance. If the army attacked the prison, they would be killed. The tense standoff over the guards continued as former prison buddies defiantly stared each other down. It was clear that Ford and the other inmates were not going to give up without a ferocious fight. Enraged, Shepley and his gang finally retreated. But if he couldn't get at the guards, he was going to turn all of his fury on another group, a weaker group. He was going hunting for the rats in 1D. Shepley and his men raced to the cell block where they knew they would find their targets. With all the commotion in the dome, the undesirables had been left unguarded. They dragged 13 inmates from 1D into the center of the dome. Some grabbed at their captors, whimpering and begging to be released. Others came quietly.
Once he had been considered the strongest man in the world. Now he was nothing. Only 10 years earlier, he was a world weightlifting champion, the recipient of several gold medals, and the first man alive to bench press 400, then 450, then 500 pounds. Now he drifted through the streets of Vancouver's downtown east side in tattered, mismatched clothing, his champion physique having dwindled from 305 pounds to just 120. The main reason for his precipitous decline was booze. Born with a club foot and crossed eyes, the young Hepburn was forced to endure multiple painful surgeries throughout his childhood and became a popular target for bullies. His home life was no better. His father, an abusive alcoholic, left when Hepburn was 4, and his mother's series of new husbands wanted little to do with him. Forced out of his home at 18, physical training became an outlet, a way to transform himself from a scared, physically challenged kid into a champion. It wasn't enough. Winning the World Heavyweight Championship in 1953 should have been a cause for celebration, an amazing accomplishment for someone in his position. Instead, he turned to the bottle.
Hepburn stayed overnight in the hospital, fasting and responding to a set of questions for the upcoming session. The next day, he was led into a private room and given 250 micrograms of LSD, dissolved in water and served in a crystal chalice. In attendance was J. Ross McLean and therapist Frank Ogden. As the drug began to take hold, Hepburn noted he was going through a dark valley. I was floating, coasting down, and there were caverns and rocks and skulls and bones. Hepburn heard a loud clang, a noise he later discovered was the scratch of the needle on the nearby record player. He reached the bottom of the pit and found himself strapped to the ground, naked and lying on his back. And from the forest or jungle or something, they kept coming, these demons, he explained. And they had pitchforks, and it was all Technicolor. You can only try and describe it in words. Terrified, Hepburn found himself being devoured alive. The demons that assailed him, the doctors explained, were his fears. And his drinking, he realized, was a way of coping with them. His fears, his abusive childhood, the pain of multiple surgeries, and the lack of self-worth his disabilities had engendered.